Hello and welcome to Gang Culture Podcast, a series educating you about gang culture. This season, our host Ellis Rouse continues to talk with an array of unique voices to inspire, empower, and cause change. But also this season, we are exploring alternative activities being offered to teens in Delaware. Whether you are listening at home, school, or on the way to work, we hope you enjoy and share with others.
Welcome back to Gang Culture. I'm your host, Ellis Rouse, and today I'm joined by Lauren J. Footman, who is the inaugural Executive Director of End Community Violence Now, where she superheads initiatives aimed at reducing gun violence in communities throughout Delaware. As a thought leader in violence prevention, Lauren is frequently sought after for her insights on engaging diverse communities in policy creation, program development, and research. Lauren, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
What are some of the reasons why people join gangs?
I would say, Ellis, some of the reasons that people join gangs is for connection and looking for that sense of belonging. And I think that a lot of times when we look at the communities in which gangs often pop up, there are a lot of things that may be at play, whether it is lack of positive outlets, resources, maybe some traumas that may be happening personally, lack of connection, maybe in instability in their home lives, or just, again, you could have everything and just not feel that sense of belonging. And so I think that there's a host of reasons, but I think what it comes down to when I talk to people with that lived experience is that sense of connection, that sense of feeling like you belong, and that sense of loyalty, that there's someone that truly has your back. And so I think that that is something, when you get to the heart of it, that's something a lot of us seek. And so when people don't necessarily have other avenues to access those opportunities, that creates an environment where it's like, if I can't get it elsewhere, I know that I can get it here. And so where I think a lot of times people may be confused as to why people do look to gangs. When you get to the core of what a gang offers an individual, it's a lot of the things that we may look for if we were joining a sorority or a sports team or a band. It's that camaraderie and that connection.
Yeah, and we were talking off camera about my story, and you know, for me, it was a sense of belonging, and because my community was divided by drugs and violence, I wanted to belong to a group that was respected, and you know, that's kind of what led me to that. So, yeah, I agree. What resources are there that can help prevent youth from joining gangs?
I think there are a host of resources that can be available. I think community by community, if they're actually available, is a different conversation. And so in a perfect world, there is funding for, number one, people to have the appropriate guidance counselors, social workers, as they are navigating, going through life and just the transitions and needing a safe place to have sometimes those uncomfortable conversations, but then also having the opportunity to have gym and recreation to let off some of that steam and get those endorphins up. But then also thinking about, do people have the opportunity to access theater? Can they join the gym? Can they take up cheerleading or athletics? And so I think one of the things that exists in our society, unfortunately, is where a lot of these inequities exist. We do see high rates or presence of gangs and groups that exist. And so a lot of times when we look at those same communities, they are actually they don't receive those resources, or they're not funded adequately for them to be at the level that the young people and their families deserve. And so I think a lot of times you see nonprofits and other philanthropic organizations really trying to fill in the gap to provide those opportunities. But at the same time, I think a big root cause of that is the lack of funding and the lack of opportunity, and also recognizing that everyone doesn't want to go to college. Everyone's story is not the same, and sometimes people need a little bit more intensive support, whether it's education, whether it's social, emotional, whether it's additional support figuring out what their hobbies are. And so if the schools are not resourced appropriately, they don't necessarily have those systems or individuals to kind of help them go through that personal navigation. But one thing that they can see is the people that are in gangs. They do have a ever present reality in some communities. And so where you maybe can't figure out where to get a resource, it's probably sometimes easier to access those pathways than other pathways.
Yeah, yes. What are some other alternatives besides joining a gang?
I think that there are a plethora of opportunities that people may have to join a gang. And again, I put like the context of it, of every situation is not the same. You would hope that people do have the outlets of, I know some of the communities in Delaware have the Police Athletic League as opportunities. Sometimes they have like after school programs. They may also have job opportunities, summer jobs or after school jobs. I would also say taking up activities outside of school. And I think sometimes what may exist in a school may not fit the interest. And sometimes you wonder, is there a little bit of leeway for creativity and for student voice to actually be heard to design what they're actually looking for? So I think, like, we know sometimes you have your music, you may have your art society, theater, but what if those are not the things that you're interested in? Is there gaming? Like, that's something that a lot of young people are into, and I've started to see in a lot of spaces they are starting to meet the moment. But I think an opportunity that a lot of youth serving spaces have is making sure that youth voice is informing programming, the curriculum, etc. I think an example of that is like the work group, and with the teen warehouse, and saying that they have like the teen advisory boards, and the teens really are it's for them, by them. And I really think that that is like a good example of ensuring that not only having youth serving programming, but making sure that those that you're trying to reach are actually a part of the design.
Yeah. Are there programs currently in Delaware to address community violence?
Yes, there are a plethora of programs to address community violence across the state. Wilmington has really been the historic ground zero for a lot of the community violence intervention efforts. There has been longstanding programs within the city, such as GVI, which is gun violence intervention, which specifically focuses on groups and gangs, and they're now expanded across the state. You have Christiana Care with the hospital-based intervention program Evolve. You have community-based organizations such as Center for Structural Equity that have been doing intervention outreach work. And then you have, unfortunately, gun violence upticking across the state in Kent and Sussex. And so you have newer organizations in Dover, such as the Carry the Light Project, Our Roots Foundation, and Laurel, Operation West Laurel, and Nonviolent Seaford. And so I mentioned all of those organizations because that's really what our organization works to do, is number one, understand who's doing the work across the state and making sure that they have the resources. So I think that there are organizations, but I think just making sure that they have the resources to scale, because as we do see the upticks in gun violence across the state, we do have some success stories highlighted in Wilmington and Laurel, but what we see in those success stories, you have to have coordination, ongoing resources, and so there's a lot of great work happening, and so our goal really is to make sure that that work is sustained.
Yes, and I've been a part of some of that work. It's absolutely phenomenal work that like group violence intervention Love working with those guys, John Cook
Yeah.
and the fellas. Have you seen anything that's been successful so far in reducing gun violence in Delaware?
Yes, absolutely. So I would think that the GVI program, what they have been able to do really in Laurel, I'll speak there first. With GVI, they were able to identify the individuals that were at highest risk for gun violence after outreach from some community organizations in Laurel, Delaware. And so they identified them, and then they were able to bring in credible messengers, individuals with lived experience, individuals from the Leaders in Transition program as credible messengers that not only had lived experience but were culturally compelling and relevant to the young men that were in the program. And really, they not only identified them, provided them some mentorship, and then we've used that to build out additional programming with our community-based partners. And one of our success stories is that Laurel has been over 12 months without a shooting or a homicide. And so that is a huge celebratory moment for our ecosystem, because you talk about what are the conditions to make that successful, but that's because you have community members, you have the school, you have law enforcement, you have DHSS with social services, philanthropy, all working together for a common good. But one of the things that we talk a lot about is it's targeted intervention, and it's tailored. And so, again, we are dealing with those that are identified at highest risk, providing them that intensive support that they need. And so as they are able to stabilize with that mentorship and support, we are now working with them, thinking a lot about how do we open up workforce pathways and focusing on their mental health and well-being. And so we recently received a grant to do a pilot program with those same individuals to focus on a crime prevention through environmental design, where we are reclaiming public spaces that may have been impacted by gun violence and really creating space for community engagement and well-being. So as a part of that, we are designing a vegetable garden that will be for the community. We're also doing two gardens at the Laurel Police Department, and also doing a mural of the students who lost their lives, unfortunately, to gun violence in Laurel. We're doing a mural at Laurel High School and doing a peace garden. And so working directly with, again, the young people who were impacted in those experiences, and also focusing not only on honoring the lives, but making sure that the community has access to trauma supports. One of the things that we heard a lot from the community in Laurel, the uptick in gun violence was something, and experiencing gun violence at that level was something that they weren't used to. And so not only the individual trauma for the people directly involved, but the community trauma, their families, and so like the co-victims of gun violence, making sure that they have the support to heal. And the last thing I'll say, another success case is what we're seeing in Wilmington. They are probably, it was 5 years, but now at a 6-year decline in gun violence. And so that's really great. Chief Campos always says, like, the goal is to get to zero, but for where Wilmington was, we're back to pre-pandemic levels, and we have a lot of the infrastructure in place to continue.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What is necessary to sustain and expand efforts to reduce gun violence?
Number one, good data. And I think that the data is from not only law enforcement, but having community relationships where community can feel comfortable to speak out, unfortunately, if something does happen with the cycle of retaliatory violence. And so building strong community partnerships is a big piece of it. Also having organizations that are credentialed, trained, and have credibility in the communities in which they look to operate to provide the services. And then also making sure that there is adequate funding, and also making sure that there's not duplication of services, particularly in this funding climate where every penny counts more than ever, making sure that we are thinking about a continuum of care and really helping people really upskilling what they're good at and helping people know their lane so we're not stepping over each other. But then on top of that, really the funding, and it's public-private funding. And so thinking about how we continue to grow our support of bringing on more foundations, philanthropic dollars, how we continue to expand dollars with the state, but also with our municipalities, the counties, and also our school districts, because they also have public safety budgets as well. But like, how do we also incorporate our corporate partners? Delaware is rich in business, and so how do we better align our business efforts to direct investment in community violence and prevention strategies, but also the workforce development and economic opportunity? And so those are really the things that we think about, and we are being very intentional to also say a big piece of this is the accountability of the service providers as and being good stewards of resources so people see the value, because we know gun violence is an issue, but with anything, what are the outcomes, what are the metrics, and being good stewards and being transparent. And as the field continues to evolve, I think it's really important to say that the community violence intervention field, or CVI for short, is ever evolving. And so as a new field, we have to do a lot of sharing and being transparent to say, like, how do we improve it? How do we sustain it? I know a lot of the work we do is talking about how do we ensure that this work is seen as a first responder field. But when we think about our first responders, think about our EMTs, our firefighters, our police officers. They're trained, they're credentialed, they do continuing education. And so I think that that's also a big piece of it as well, as we continue to grow the field, grow the resources that our organizations grow with the infrastructure and prioritize the infrastructure, but then also commit to that ongoing learning that is required for the field to sustain.
Lauren, could you tell us a little bit about the funding from the federal aspect of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So under the previous administration, there was efforts to really prioritize community violence intervention as a critical piece of the public safety strategy at the federal and local level. And so there were funds made available as a part of the ARPA and CARES funding. There was an opportunity for gun violence organizations really to use those funds as direct responders and first responders. One of the things we recognize is people that were doing CVI work were actually being the credible messengers during COVID. So as they were trying to interrupt violence, they also were the individuals that were serving as credible messengers for what we now know as COVID-19, but didn't kind of know what we were living through at the time. And so during that time, not only from the funds related to COVID, there started to be CVI PI funds, which were federal block grants directly to community-based organizations doing the work on the ground. And so Delaware actually was able to receive a grant, not through CVI PI, but through congressionally directed spending. And that during that same time frame. And so having those federal funds flow through Delaware allowed us to build capacity, facilitate connectivity, and also expand programming. One of the unfortunate realities as we've went through a change of administration is the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that existed under the previous administration no longer exists either. And so that all of government approach to address community violence at the federal level has dissipated. And so how we look at prioritizing resources and supports for the ATF, or figuring out not only how law enforcement centered departments are thinking about gun violence, but Department of Labor and Department of Energy are thinking about their role, or HUD, because one of the things that President Biden prioritized with that all of government approach is recognizing that all aspects of government have a responsibility and have a role to really play in helping to prevent and interrupt gun violence. And so in this current juncture, the CVI PI funds were in fact made available, but the difference is that they can only be applied to by law enforcement agencies, not the community-based organizations that they were designed to actually support. And so another piece of that is only local law enforcement agencies can apply. And so state law enforcement agencies can apply. So that means that if multiple municipalities in Delaware applied, they could be competing against each other, which we would not like. And then unfortunately, it creates some caveats because depending upon some localities' stances with certain federal mandates that are attached to the gun violence, it may preclude them from being able to apply. And so one of the unfortunate realities is that funding is not available. But on the flip side, Rob and Greg, who were the inaugural directors of that work, they say and have been to Delaware often, is that they gave us a playbook. And so there is a playbook of how you can have an all-of-government approach really at the local level. So how you can be involving your Department, again, of Public Health, how you can be involving your Department of Labor to really think about how they may already be supporting prevention and intervention efforts, but it just may not be coordinated. But then also thinking about the data that is, again, critical to doing this work, because one of the things we want to do is making sure that we're investing in areas that are being disproportionately impacted. And so part of that is making sure that we have good data from law enforcement when they're reporting it, but then also with the Department of Public Health, they're able to pull all types of data to really give us a full picture of hospital data, law enforcement data, et cetera, to help us understand the trends and where our opportunities are. And so when we think about the opportunities that currently exist here in Delaware with a new state office of gun violence prevention and community safety, we have a playbook to run off of. And so I think we just have to be a little bit more creative of how we may even leverage some federal funds to get to our desired outcome. Like I mentioned, again, the crime prevention through environmental design program that we're doing. We recently received a grant from DENREC, which primarily focuses on the environment, but that was a unique connection point of how we're manipulating the physical environment to reduce gun violence. And so I think that definitely the moment requires a lot of agility. Last week we did see that some gun violence programming did make it through appropriations at the federal level, so that is a good sign. And so I think what we just have to do is remain flexible, but then also when there are those federal opportunities, even if we don't feel that we're going to get them, continue to apply and make sure that our federal delegation continues to know how important and life-saving those dollars are and how they translate to the direct impact like we talked about in parts of Delaware already. But I will definitely say that it was definitely a huge hurt to the field when the contracts were, the grants were stopped earlier this year. People immediately had to, in some cases, lay off staff, were put in financial positions. And so one of the things that situation I think has told us is also to think about how we're having financial health conversations with our nonprofits and diversifying their funding stream. So it's been a lot in the last 5 years. The field has grown significantly with federal dollars. And so now we just have to figure out how do we sustain the momentum and get a little bit more creative, but then also think about how we're preparing our internal infrastructure to sustain in such a ever-changing funding landscape.
Lauren, thank you for all the work that you're doing, and honestly, just putting out there the programs that are available. I really appreciate you and that's in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ellis.
Awesome.
We hope you found this episode informative. We look forward to continuing the conversation and stay tuned for our next episode.
You're listening to a production from The Cause. Learn more at causetheworld.com.